Hi, I'm Bob.
And I'm Cheryl.
Welcome to Digging Deeper, brought to you by California Unearthed. And we are hitting the Halloween season.
Ooh.
It is full of changing leaves, cooler weather,
Restless spirits.
and restless spirits. And so in today's episode, we're going to talk about just that, a restless spirit. And this story, of course, is going to take place in a cemetery.
No.
Yeah. You didn't see that one
No,
coming,
I
did
did
you?
not.
So this is the story of the Pink Lady. It takes place in the Yorba Cemetery in Yorba Linda, California. I have taken you there a few times.
Yes, you have.
I grew up in my very young years in Yorba Linda, and some of my fondest memories. I absolutely love that town. And if you have not been to Yorba Linda, it is kind of like a, what would you call it? It's not your normal city.
It kind of has a little bit of a country feel.
Yeah, there
to
you
it.
go. There you go. It has a country feel to it. And growing up there in the 70s, it definitely had a country feel. Our family, we had a pig named Arnold. We had bunny rabbits, and my cousin Kim actually had a horse named Comanche. And so I learned how to ride a horse when I was very, very young. And that whole area in there is where I grew up. I grew up in Yorba Linda and Fullerton. They're right next to each other. And Fullerton's kind of the same as Yorba Linda. It kind of has that country feel to it while you're in the middle of the city.
Yeah, you don't really, it doesn't have that vibe that you're in the city at all.
Yeah, exactly. So when I think of Yorba Linda, I think of the pepper trees, the eucalyptus, and there's this weed, and I don't know what the weed's called, but it smells like black licorice.
Oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. Fennel?
I don't know. If anybody knows,
I think it's fennel.
leave it in the comments. It may be. But my memory is definitely the pepper trees. And so the cemetery here, Yorba Cemetery, has pepper trees surrounding it. It is absolutely beautiful. So let me give you a little bit of history on the Yorba Cemetery, and then we'll go into the ghost story. The Yorba Cemetery sits on about an acre of land in the Woodgate Park neighborhood of Yorba Linda and is considered one of the oldest cemeteries in Orange County.
Wow.
Established in 1860, but it is said that there is an even older burial ground just north of the cemetery.
Really?
I don't know where that's at, and I would love to find out.
That'd be neat to find.
And to find out if it's still a burial ground or if they paved it over.
Right.
The Yorba Cemetery was established on land originally part of the Fernando Bernardo Antonio Yorba 13,323 acre rancho Caña de Santa Ana, meaning the Canyon St. Anne, granted to him in 1834. This is where he built his 50-room adobe hacienda.
Wow. 50 rooms.
You want to know why he had 50 rooms?
Why?
He had 21 children.
Oh, geez, yeah, he would need those.
There's 21 children from 3 different women.
Wow.
So after his death on November 20th, 1858, Bernardo would deed land to the Catholic Church. And on that land, he set aside would be for a chapel, the cemetery, and a garden.
Wow. That's actually pretty nice of him to do that.
Well, what it was apparently is he, in 1858, before he passed away, he wanted to set up a cemetery and a chapel. And so he told the townspeople there, his friends and family, that he would donate the land if they would come up with the money to build the chapel.
Oh, okay.
But he passed away before any of this could happen. And so in his will, he set aside the land and some money to build the chapel and the cemetery.
Okay.
And what's funny is the cemetery was in the old horse corral.
Oh, really?
His old horse corrals where the cemetery and chapel sat.
That's interesting. I wonder why that spot.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That'd be interesting to find out. So the Yorba Cemetery was to serve the Yorba family and their friends. It was these same families that maintained the cemetery after 1860. Like I said, it was in an old horse corral, which contained the San Antonio Chapel, the garden, and the cemetery.
Is the chapel still there?
No.
Okay.
It is not. And we're going to get into a little bit of the cemetery and what happened to that here in a moment. So the residents of the Santa Ana Canyon, many of these residents were prominent people in the area. And in 1860s, there wasn't a whole lot of people in Yorba Linda or in Southern California. You had Los Angeles down the road. That's where most of the people were. But in the Orange County area, a lot of the outlining areas, like where Yorba Linda and Fullerton were still more of the ranchos.
Okay.
Like the Yorba Rancho. And so, like I said, a lot of these were prominent people in the area. And it was kind of like a private cemetery, basically for the Yorbas and their friends. So the exact number of burials is unknown, but it is known through written records that they have 435 burials in the cemetery.
Wow.
But there may be a few more than that, but they don't know for sure. But they do know, like I said, 435 because of written records. The last known official burial was Joe Dolores Fuentes that took place in 1939.
Oh, okay.
And I have some information on why that was the last burial in 1939 and why the cemetery stopped burying people there that year. And I'll get to that once again in a moment. So Bernardo's son, or one of his sons, was the first caretaker of the cemetery. And he took notes, but he never made a map of the cemetery. So he never said where anybody was buried in the cemetery. So he would take notes like this person passed away and their family paid $10 to have them buried, but he never made a map to say where anybody was
exactly
at.
They're at.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which you really need in a cemetery.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I believe his name was Presidio Yorba. And if I butchered that name, I apologize. So in the early 1970s, the cemetery was then deeded to the county of Orange after paying $1.
Wow.
But they didn't do anything with it until the 1980s.
So that just means it was just left unattended. Nobody was taking care of it?
Pretty much. The Yorba family was still in the area, and probably they looked after it a little bit, but for the most part, nothing was really done until the 1980s. And when they did do something with it, the weeds were out of control, as you can imagine. The problem with that is when you leave a cemetery unmaintained and nobody watching it, then people end up vandalizing said cemetery. So now it's operated and maintained by the Orange County Parks Department. And you can actually go on a tour of the cemetery once a month. It's the first Saturday of every month from 10 to 11.
That'd be fun to go.
And the tour guide is Melanie Goss, and she is very well versed in the history of this cemetery. I actually watched a video that a newspaper reporter put on YouTube, and he filmed her entire presentation, and it was very, very well done. I cannot wait to meet her and go watch this presentation for myself. I will put a link to the video in the show notes down below. It was created by a journalist who works for the Fullerton Observer who wrote an article on the Yorba Cemetery. His name is Emerson Little. So you would think that Bernardo Yorba would have been buried in his own cemetery.
You would think.
He was not.
Why was that?
Well, because of two reasons. Number one, you were not going to bury him in a horse corral because he would have been the first burial.
Okay.
But the main reason is the cemetery was not blessed by a priest.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
They were Roman Catholic, and so since the land was not blessed by the priest, he wasn't going to be buried there. And I believe the first burial actually took place in 1862, even though it says 1860 was the establishment date, and he had set the land aside in 1858. I believe the first burial was not until 1862. When Bernardo Yorba passed away, like I said, November 20th, 1858, he was buried at the Old Cavalry Cemetery in Los Angeles, beside a lot of his other family members.
Okay, which that would make sense.
And the Old Cavalry Cemetery is a very prominent cemetery. A lot of the city founders are buried there, like the gentleman who founded Downey was buried there.
Really?
Yeah. But that cemetery does not exist anymore. It is actually called the Cathedral High School.
Really?
And the old cemetery is where the Cathedral High School parking lot and sports fields now sit.
Wow. So I guess my question, did they inter the people that were buried there? Or or did they just...
Most of them.
Okay.
So most of them were reinterred other places, like Barnito. He was reinterred into the Yorba Cemetery.
Okay.
And then other people were reinterred in other cemeteries, but if family members didn't claim them, then they would get reinterred in the new Cavalry Cemetery.
Oh, okay.
And so they were finding dead bodies when they were doing the construction of the high school in 1925.
Jeez.
So the new Cavalry Cemetery was begun in 1896, which means the old Cavalry Cemetery stopped their interments, and it wasn't until 1923 that Yorba was transferred over to the Yorba Cemetery along with the rest of his family.
Okay.
And then other members at that point were transferred to other cemeteries, like I said, like the New Cavalry or Forest Lawn or wherever their families wanted to put them. And the high school, guess what their mascot's called?
I would think something like Spirit or...
The Phantoms.
Okay.
So there's actually a reporter from the LA Times who walked through the cemetery in 1902. And this is 6 years after the last burial. And this comes from the Lost Cemeteries of Early LA, the Forgotten Burial Sites. I believe this is a PBS special that took place, and I found it online. But I wanted to read to you, or if you want to read it, that's fine, what this news reporter had written in 1902.
I don't mind reading it. A reporter from the Los Angeles Times who walked through the cemetery in 1902 was shocked by the contrast between the forlorn cemetery and the urban life that had intruded on it. Even now, in its most secluded depths, among sunken graves and blackened tombstones, shaded by great pepper trees and overgrown with grass and weeds, the mournful creak of the oil pumps, the clangor of the locomotive, the crash of the electric gong, and the din of the iron foundry is never hushed. Old Cavalry continued to deteriorate until 1925, when the city took charge of removing some of the remaining burials to New Cavalry.
So I looked to find out where the old Cavalry Cemetery was located in Los Angeles. There was a Jewish cemetery next to the old Cavalry Cemetery. It was actually the first Jewish cemetery in Los Angeles. And that sat next to the old Cavalry Cemetery. But where these two cemeteries were located is now just south of Dodger Stadium.
Really?
So they are right across the 110 freeway from Dodger Stadium. So you have the parking lot of Dodger Stadium that kind of meets up with the 110 freeway. And directly across the freeway is the Cathedral High School.
Okay.
Where the cemeteries, both cemeteries, used to sit. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
That is interesting.
So like I said, they moved Barnito and the family into the Yorba Cemetery in 1923, but in 1928 there was actually a memorial marker that was placed there. It was placed on April 24th of 1928. As I said earlier, the cemetery closed in 1939. Now here's the reason. This is going to be very interesting. In 1935, employees of the Anaheim Union Water Company were doing work in the area right around the cemetery, and every time they were there, they would find a body.
Like just a body laying...
Well, no, they were digging.
Oh, they were digging. Gotcha.
Yes,
okay.
They were digging. And in their digging, they'd find a body. And that freaked them out.
Well, yeah.
And so they started a letter writing campaign to get the burials to stop there at the cemetery. And it took 4 years, but they finally stopped in 1939.
Wow. It makes me... I'm sorry. It made me think of the song from... I think it was Randy Travis. No, maybe Randy Travis, Digging Up Bones.
Oh, yeah.
That song just came into mind when they were just...
Oh, yeah. I spoke of the vandalism earlier.
Right.
Between 1939 and 1980 when they started actually doing something. So Melanie Goss talks about that in her tour of the cemetery. And she says, and I'm quoting from her, gravestones have been damaged by vandals. Every one of the headstones except for Bernardo's has been knocked over at least once in the cemetery. Every one of them. However, Bernardo's is not left out. Somebody took a shotgun and shot out 2 of the panels that would tell you who was buried there. And there used to be wooden crosses or wooden headstones in the cemetery as well. But obviously those don't last because of the heat and the fires in the area throughout the decades. There are 100 headstones left in the cemetery.
Wow. Out of what, 400 and something?
435.
Wow, that's sad.
Well, you got to remember, like she said, there was a lot of wooden headstones, and you get a fire that goes through there, it's going to burn out a lot of those headstones.
And just through time, the wood just rots.
Right, and the wood just rots, and those don't last. And so what they're doing now is, and she may say this in a second, but they are putting in new crosses for every grave that they find that they can identify. And here we go. This is exactly what I was just saying. This is still Melanie talking. Wherever you've seen the white cross, this is where we have identified a burial. People get white crosses when we know who they are and where they're buried. We're going to put brass plaques on each one of them to identify each person because everyone is important.
Yes, I do believe. I always find it really sad when we go to a cemetery and it's either like the old, aluminum little placard, but you can't read it anymore. And it makes me feel sad knowing that no one's going to know who this person is unless it is recorded properly. It's just sad seeing that.
What's interesting about those plaques that you're talking about, it actually shocks me that they've lasted as long as they do sometimes.
Yeah, that is
Some
true.
of them, you're right, you can't read. And other ones you can read perfectly, and they've been there for decades.
Yeah.
Decades.
Or they're just rusted over and you can't read too.
Right. Very true. So Melanie and you bring up a very, very good point. I do a lot of cemetery work, you know that, and I do a lot of stuff on Find a Grave. And the reason why I do that is because what she just said. Everybody's important. Everybody should be remembered. And a lot of these people never get visitors at the graveyard, or their family members don't even know that they're there to be visited. And so I like to make sure that I put them on Find a Grave so their family members can at least know where they're at if they don't already. And I've had many, many, many messages on Find a Grave saying, thank you. I never knew where my grandmother was buried or my aunt or whoever. So thank you for making the memorial. Now I know where she's at. And it's surprising on how many people don't know where their relatives are buried.
Right. Yeah. Because unfortunately, some people just get lost.
Right. Exactly. So like I said, in 1980, the county came in and cleaned up the entire cemetery. They took all the headstones out of the cemetery and put in a layer of dirt. The problem was, once again, the county didn't make a map.
Oh, jeez. So now did they even know where to put
They
back?
did not.
Who? Okay.
So where they put the headstones was Barnito Yorba V, his barn across the river. So when they went to put the headstones back, they brought Barnito Yorba V out, and he knew where a lot of them went. Mm-hmm. He said, well, this one goes here, this one goes here. And it's the that gives us our ghost story as well. And we'll get to that in a minute. But they're very lucky that he knew where a lot of those
most definitely.
headstones went.
When you said that, my heart dropped. I was like, oh no. That's so sad.
I mean, to think about it, they didn't make a map the second time.
It's like, goodness gracious, Charlie Brown.
And like I said, this is where the story of the Pink Lady comes in. So bear with me on this. It's going to get a little confusing, and you may be disappointed at the end result.
Some of your stories not confusing. But in a good way.
Yeah, I know. All right. So the Pink Lady, according to local legend, a ghost referred to as the Pink Lady appears at the cemetery on June 15th of even number years.
Really?
It would be odd that she would show up on just one day in even number years. Some sources say that she is Elvina de los Reyes, a descendant of the Yorba family.
Okay.
And that she was jostled out of a buggy, fell, hit her head, and died at 17 years old on December December 2nd, 1910. She was on her way home from a dance at Valencia High School.
They must have been going pretty fast for her to be jostled out.
You would think.
Were they probably horse playing?
Who knows? So they brought her to the Yorba Cemetery and buried her there. But like I said, when they removed all the headstones and they didn't make a map, they didn't know exactly where she was.
Right.
And according to different websites and different people, there's some other names associated with the Pink Lady. And actually, one of them was a man, which doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, everybody in the historical aspect of this and the Yorba family believe that it is this young lady.
Okay.
On the 15th of June, on the even number of years, like I said, she floats across the cemetery and checks up on her family. There have been no official reports of the spirit appearing since the 1980s. Although the ghost herself has not been photographed or seen since the 1980s, energy inside the cemetery has been felt and reported. So here's where this story gets interesting. The entire story of the Pink Lady was made up.
I was wondering, because I'm like, why pink?
Yeah, well, because she was wearing a pink dress when she fell out of the buggy.
Okay.
I forgot to bring up that. You're correct.
Okay, I was like, why was she labeled the Pink Lady?
Right.
So, okay, if she was wearing a pink dress, then yes.
I apologize. She was wearing a pink dress. I forgot to bring that up. So it is said that the story is made up. In the 1960s, a librarian at the Yorba Linda Library had children coming in for reading hour, and she made up this story on Halloween to these children. And you know how children are. Two children go tell two other children, they go tell two other children, and then the whole school district knows.
Right.
And so the evidence, and actually, I brought this up before when I posted something on Facebook on the story being fake, and I've actually had people get upset with me.
Really?
Saying that it was fake, them believing it was true. So here's the evidence that is out there showing that this story was made up. Valencia High School never existed in 1910.
Oh.
It didn't begin until the 1930s. The young woman, who they say is the Pink Lady, was 31 years old when she died. And she died of pneumonia after giving birth to her daughter. And that daughter also passed away 2 weeks after her mother.
Okay.
So the young lady who is buried at the cemetery was not a teenager. She was 31 years old and died while giving birth. Valencia High School did not exist. And so the story basically is all made up.
I'm disappointed.
Well, it's a good Halloween story.
It definitely is a good Halloween story, but still.
And it's lasted, what? Let's see, 1960s? 60 years now?
Right.
And people still believe it.
Wow.
People go out there on June 15th every year.
I was wondering.
To see if they can see the Pink Lady. And it's also said, Melanie brings this up, that if she died in childbirth, she wasn't wearing a pink dress either.
Right, exactly.
So
she'd have probably been in her white nightgown.
Probably. So Elvina de los Reyes supposedly is the Pink Lady, but unfortunately she is not.
Well, I guess that every cemetery needs to have some kind of spirit story or haunting.
Yeah, definitely. For sure. And Melanie believes she knows where she's buried,
but not 100% certain.
But not 100%.
Right.
She's where her headstone is at isn't where she's buried at.
Oh, okay.
And she says because the dirt out there is like concrete. It's rock hard. And there are two other people buried there close by. And she was saying that they're not going to dig a double grave.
Right.
Because that soil is just way too hard. So she believes she knows where she's at. And she's buried there with her husband and her 2-week-old daughter. So that was the story of the Pink Lady in the Yorba Cemetery.
It's a good story, but sad that it's not really true.
So what's funny about it is Melanie believes in spirits and ghosts and stuff like that. And she said she hasn't had any experiences with Elvina or the Pink Lady or anything like that out there. And so she says if anybody does, she would love to know it. But like I said, there was a energy out there. And of course there's going to be. It's a cemetery.
Going to be, yeah.
So whether you believe in ghosts or not, that's up to the listener here. I have had my own experiences. Cheryl has had her own experiences. We've had an experience together about ghosts. And so I believe that there is something out there. And I have a hard time I'm not believing that there is something out there in a cemetery. And so if there's an energy being felt out there, then there's somebody out there. It may not be Elvina,
right,
but it may be somebody else.
Somebody there just trying to communicate.
Exactly. And since I brought that up, you guys are probably wondering what kind of experiences we've had. And it being Halloween, well, why don't we share them real quick?
Sure.
So I have had 3 experiences. So the first experience was when my aunt passed away. Some time had gone by, and I was walking through the house and walking past her room. I wasn't thinking about her. I wasn't thinking about anything. I was just going back to the office area, and I turned my head and looked in her room, and she was on the side of her bed, standing up next to the side of her bed, waving me into the room. And so I stopped immediately, backed up, and looked back in that room again, and she was gone. It was just a split second. I saw her wave me in, and then she was gone. Second time was when Cheryl and I were at the house on Lake Boulevard. It was a mobile home, and I was in the bathroom. Cheryl was in the bedroom. I had the bathroom door closed for some reason. I don't remember why, but I had it closed, and I heard a woman's voice, and I could not tell you what she said.
It was like a mumble.
Yeah, it was a mumble, but she said something, and I couldn't hear what she said, but it was definitely a woman's voice. Mm-hmm. And I asked Cheryl, did you say something? And she said, no, I didn't say anything. Did you? And she asked me, did you just hear a woman's voice? And I was, holy crap, yes, I did. You heard that? She goes, yeah, I heard that. It is 11 o'clock at night. We are on 14 acres. The only people around us or close to us is the gentleman and his wife who own the property, and they go to bed early. So I walked out the back door. I looked around. I didn't see anybody. I didn't hear anybody. All I heard were the crickets and the coyotes. And so you're probably thinking, it's a coyote. No.
It was distinctively a woman saying something, but it like I said, it was more mumbling than anything, so I could not make out what she was saying.
And it was in the room.
Yeah, it was.
It was not outside. I just went outside to verify that there was nothing or nobody out there. And there wasn't. And so that one really got me in believing that there is something out there. Mm-hmm. And then the third time was at Cheryl's new house here. I've heard voices at her new house. Well, it's not new anymore, but I've heard voices at her house thinking that it's just the neighbors or somebody passing by or whatever.
Were they male?
Yes.
Okay. Then I'll explain that.
And I, once again, have no explanation for it because I didn't see anybody.
So with that, I've been in this house now for 9 years, and both of my parents have passed on, and every time I'm sitting in the living room watching TV, and I tend to see like flashing, like blinking of lights, or orbs if you want, not floating orbs, it's just like blinking lights. So I just thought it was my parents communicating to me, letting them know, hey, we're here. But no, I actually then one night I was probably about 11:30 or 12. I'm in my room at this time. I'm by myself in the house. I hear 2 male voices talking in the room. Could not make out what they were saying, but they were 2 distinct male voices. And that creeped me out. That really creeped me out. And so my neighbor up the street, she's a medium, and her boyfriend, they like to do like ghost hunting things. And I was telling them about it, and said like, well, let's come in and let's do something. So they put up all the little REM pod stuff. Just as Jesse's putting out the REM pods, they start going off, and we're like, here we go. And actually my neighbor, she was able to communicate with, they were 2 younger males who just liked the house. They just liked hanging around. And we finally said, nope, you got to go. And they weren't too happy, but they finally did go. And since then, I haven't really heard them or felt them, because I always felt something. And the only other thing that's happened is that one of my cats has passed away recently. And early in the morning, I hear him jumping on the bed and meowing at me from time to time. But other than that, and since then, since a little girl, I've had many, many experiences, different experiences. So yes, I definitely believe in ghosts. I think it's really up to the individual person who wants to perceive that or be open to it. But yes, I definitely do believe in ghosts. And especially with cemeteries, there has to be energy there of people who have passed that just haven't really accepted that they're dead, So when I hear of ghost stories in a cemetery, makes sense to me.
I actually just thought of another incident that Cheryl and I had together. I was actually at the Ready Memorial Park with Cheryl doing some photographing of headstones for Find a Grave, and it was about dusk. It was just getting about dusk. There was nobody else at the cemetery except for us, and we had her dog Asha, who's a German Shepherd Akita mix, with us, and she was in the back seat. And there was 2 deer far, far away, and the dog had seen the deer before and didn't bother the dog. The dog was fine. And we were just getting ready to leave the cemetery, and we had the window down about halfway so she could stick her head out. And just as we went to turn left to leave the cemetery, she lost it.
She went ballistic.
She went ballistic for sure. She just started barking like she was so angry. And I was like, what is she barking at? And we both look around. The deer were not there. There was nobody there. And she was pointing her nose at this headstone that was right in front of her and just barking like I'd never heard her bark before. She was losing it.
Yeah.
She wanted out of that car.
Mm-hmm. I was afraid she was going to try to get out the way that she was acting, but I forgot about that, yeah. But there was nobody else in that cemetery at that time.
And I've had other incidences when I was younger at my great-grandmother's house. My mother said she heard voices in there. I never heard them, but my mother said she's heard voices in there. And that's where my great-grandmother, my uncle, great-uncle passed away, both in that house. And so you never know. Maybe Fred or Grandma Lo were trying to communicate with us, but who knows. And then I also had a photograph that I found from Fullerton. And I remember the event very, very well. And we had all the cousins there visiting the grandparents, and nobody wears hats. Nobody wore hats. It just wasn't, none of us did. It just wasn't a thing. And so I looked at this photograph, and my grandparents used to have a hutch. And in the reflection of this hutch is a gentleman with a 1920s hat. It was very odd. And I sent it around to the family. Nobody knew who it was. Nobody could remember anybody ever wearing that kind of hat before in the family or friends or anybody. And so we came to the conclusion that we caught some sort of image on camera.
Yeah.
And it was very 1920-ish wear, 1920s hat. And what's funny about that is in that area of Fullerton, before there were ever any houses, where my grade school is, and still is, used to be a polo ground where they played polo.
Play polo.
Yeah, horses and polo,
Right.
So that was polo grounds before the school was ever there. So maybe somebody lost their life in the polo grounds?
Maybe. Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Because we lived right across the street from the school.
Right.
Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this episode. I want to say happy Halloween to everybody.
Yep, happy Halloween. Have a spooktacular Halloween.
That's right. Spectacular Halloween. Ooh. And just to let everybody know, I am having a corneal transplant surgery next Wednesday. I'm going to try to record an episode for that week, but if I miss a week or two, that is why I'm recovering from a corneal transplant. So hopefully I will be able to get some episodes out in the next couple of weeks, but definitely next week I'm going to try to record something for you guys before I go under the knife. At least it's not on Halloween. It's the day after Halloween.
That's true. Yes, that is true.
I think I'd probably be a little freaked out having surgery on Halloween. I guess you could call me Frankenstein.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Digging Deeper and the Pink Lady of the Yorba Cemetery. And like I said before, I am hoping at some point to do a video on the Yorba Cemetery and get the tour guide on camera and talking about the history. She does a much better job than I can ever do. She really knows her stuff. And so shout out to her. Shout out to the Orange County Parks Department. And thank you, Cheryl, for joining me once again.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you guys on the next episode. Whether you live in Orange County or are just visiting and you want to check out this amazing tour with Melanie at the Yorba Cemetery on the first Saturday of the month, I will put a link in the show notes for their official website, Orange County Parks website, along with their Facebook page as well. You can go there, get all the information that you need, updates, directions, and why not make it a full day and explore all that Yorba Linda has to offer.